It helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, threes were in the news this week. It has been 3 seasons since the Saints were in a playoff game, but that will change this weekend when the team begins the tricentennial year by playing the Carolina Panthers for the 3rd time in 1 season. We'll look tonight at the road to the Super Bowl. We'll also examine what 2018 may bring into politics and at a former state senator reinventing himself. Our Future Watch segment looks at special art exhibits for the new year, and a building once intended to house art studios will become a culinary school instead. All of this plus the latest on the Pelicans are on the roster for tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Stephanie Grace, columnist, The New Orleans Advocate, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Jeff Duncan, sports columnist, NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune. And we're over to Jeff first, because that's all everybody's thinking about right now is the Saints. What a season it's turned out to be.
Yeah, very surprising. I think when I was on the show in preseason, I told you all I thought this team could be better than everybody thought, but I didn't even think they would go 11-5 and win the NFC South Division. But I tell you, they've had an incredible offseason, incredible rookie class. Nobody knew what these young players were going to do, and now Alvin Kamara, Marshawn Lattimore, they're Pro Bowlers in their first season in the NFL, and the team has really gotten a boost from all those young players. And I think they've got a shot as good as anybody because the NFC is so wide open right now. They're not the strength of the NFL is the AFC with the Pittsburgh Steelers and the New England Patriots. They're on the other side of the bracket, if you will. The NFC with the Saints, the Eagles, the Vikings, the Rams. I think you could throw them all in a hat, and any of them could come out of there.
So you did a piece, like 9 potential reasons why it could really be the road to at least playing in the Super Bowl. So I want you to go over those reasons. Number 1 is the Superdome.
Right. Well, I mean, the Superdome has been a great home field advantage for the Saints all through the years. And this year, the Saints have won 7 games in a row there. Really, no one's come close to beating them recently in the Superdome except the Washington Redskins. And when they get that place rocking, and we've all been in there, that noise factor really unhinges the opponent. And I think they get that first win there, it could propel them down the road. They're going to have to go on the road probably after that first game against Carolina, but they could always come back here and potentially play the NFC Championship game against the Atlanta Falcons.
Let's hope that's the case.
How fun would that be?
Yes,
yeah, that would be fun.
That would be great. Kicking game.
Well, they've got a great punter and a great kicker, Will Lutz and Thomas Morstead. I think sometimes get overlooked. You know, it's not a sexy part of the game. But in the playoffs, it might come down to a field goal. We all remember the NFC Championship game. Came down to Garrett Hartley making a field goal. I think it could come down to a field goal this year. And Will Lutz is kicking very well. They finally solved that position.
Offensive line.
Well, the offensive line's the strength of this team. It's a very powerful group. They've got like 6 or 7 starting caliber players, and they run block very well, and they pass block very well. And you don't find that very often in the NFL. Now that Terron Armstead, their starting left tackle, is back, he's been injured most of the year. Now that he's back, it solidifies the group up front, and it'll be a strength.
Defense.
Well, that's always been the bane of the Saints' existence, right?
First, we can say it's good.
Right. They finally have a good defense, and that's attributable to this young rookie class. Marcus Williams is playing free safety, Marshawn Lattimore, and King Crawley, the other cornerback's a young player. They've got a lot of first- and second-year players on that side of the ball, and they're just playing with a lot of confidence. Cam Jordan is probably the best player on that side of the ball, and he might be the best defensive lineman the Saints have had in 2 or 3 decades.
Backs.
Well, we all know Alvin Kamara, the rookie from Tennessee, and Mark Ingram, the running back combination. The Saints haven't had anybody like this since Deuce McAllister and Reggie Bush, and it really keeps defenses off balance because both of them can catch the ball out of the backfield. And that'll be, I think, what carries this team on Sunday against the Carolina Panthers.
Not to mention the coach.
Yeah, well, Sean Payton has skins on the wall, right? I mean, in the NFC, there aren't a lot of coaches that have experience in the playoffs. Sean Payton has 6 postseason wins. He's won a Super Bowl. And I think that gives them a huge leg up. And he's coaching more aggressively this year. And I think fans and the players like that. They like to see that aggressive Sean Payton on the sidelines. And I think he thinks he's got a really good team, and that allows him to be a little more aggressive.
He does have a really good team. Versatility.
Well, the point of that, Marcia, is that in the past, I think this team relied completely on Drew Brees to win games. This year, they can use the running backs, like we talked about. They can win with defense. They beat the Detroit Lions here by scoring 3 defensive touchdowns in a game. They can go on the road, I think, in the playoffs, like they're probably going to have to do, and maybe win in a cold weather, bad field environment because of that running game and defense, and not have to rely so much on Drew Brees.
Competition?
It's wide open. I mean, I think the NFC is wide open. I don't think there's one dominant team. The number 1 and number 2 seeds in the conference both have backup quarterbacks playing for them. So, I mean, I think it's not their strongest teams. It's going to be going against backups at quarterback for the other opposition. And so I think it's wide open for the Saints.
And your number 1 reason is number 9.
Right. Well, it all comes down to Drew Brees, right? I mean, the best player in the history of the franchise and a guy that's won a Super Bowl MVP. He's by far the best quarterback left in the NFC. And I think he always gives them a chance to win because he's such a great, tremendous talent. He's very motivated right now. He's getting toward the end of his career. He's 39 years old. And he knows that there's only going to be so many opportunities. So I think we're going to see Drew Brees at his finest here in the next couple of weeks.
Well, the short-term future, of course, we want to believe is going to be very bright. What about the long-term with this young crop that has come in that have been just so powerful?
Oh, I think the future is very bright. I think we don't have to worry anymore about whether Sean Payton's going to be coming or going. They've got to re-sign Drew Brees in the offseason, but this young core of players that they brought in the last 2 years, one good thing about them is not only are they talented, but they're cheap. And the salary cap's always a factor in the NFL. The Saints aren't having to pay them a lot of money. And yet. About 4 years from now, it'll all come home to roost. But that gives them a window of opportunity. They get Drew Brees re-signed this offseason, and everybody believes that's what's going to happen. Drew has said he wants to finish his career here. They have a chance now, a window, to be right back in the mix every year and maybe get another Super Bowl.
And is the feeling that he'll go into his 40s?
Oh, yes.
42,
I don't think there's any doubt.
Okay.
Similar to Tom Brady.
Yeah.
I think he takes care of himself so well. So does Tom Brady. You really can't look at historical perspective, historical benchmarks in the past. In the past, you never saw quarterbacks playing in their 40s.
Yeah.
Brett Favre did. He was one of the few. I think Drew Brees will.
Well, a lot of excitement, that's for sure, for this coming game. There's some former Saints players that are coming, from what I understand, right? We were talking
Reggie
about that
Bush is going to
beforehand.
be here. Marcus Shockey, Marcus Colston.
Garrett Hartley,
Yeah.
you mentioned.
Pulling out all the
Yeah.
stops.
Yeah.
Trying to get,
What
trying
are
to
the
get.
rules? Can Reggie Bush lead them onto the field?
No, can't do it. I think what they'll end up doing is they'll have them all on the sidelines. Sorry.
Have a drink.
Yeah, be a drink.
Okay.
Talk out.
We had you talking
I don't
a
know what
lot just
happened.
now. Okay, thanks a lot, Jeff. Over to Stephanie now. The other thing we like to talk about, also aside from sports, is politics.
The other sport.
Yeah, the other sport. But this year it's looking kind of quiet in Louisiana politics.
It's really interesting. I have people who I know from around the country say, oh, this is going to be a big year for you because so much is going on nationally that, the House could switch hands, the Senate could switch hands. Huge implications for the for the Trump administration, aside from all the other stuff going on, this new book and the Russia probe and everything else. Not much here, actually. For the first time, really, in the last 4 years, we've had big elections every year. We've elected 2 new U.S. senators, we've elected a new governor, and we elected a new mayor of New Orleans. This year, the biggest race, really, frankly, is the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's race that's already getting underway. We don't have any, neither of the senators is up. None of the House members is looking like they would either leave or move or have a real challenge. All of the seats are pretty much Republican or Democrat, mostly Republican. So it's not like, we have one of these seats that everybody from the country is going to be pouring money into. It's going to be we're going to be the spectators this time, I think. Like we were in Alabama, everybody was watching, 2 states over, and Mississippi could have a big Senate race, and Texas will have a big Senate race, but not us.
Well, okay, so we're not going to necessarily have the big races, but there's always positioning and looking to the future, and there are always issues that are coming up, and certainly a big one that is going to be facing state legislators is the budget.
Well, we're almost going to be into the 2019 election season this year because that's when Governor Edwards is up, all of the statewide officials in Baton Rouge, all of the legislators, and, starting with the governor, he, of course, is a Democrat in a Republican state. There have been some Republicans who've been thinking, you know, ever since the day he was elected, that he was a fluke, that he won this election because he ran a perfect campaign against a flawed candidate. It can't last. You know, we'll revert to norm and elect a Republican. He has proven to be remarkably resilient in terms of his popularity. There's a poll that Southern Media and Opinion Research did late last year that had him at 65% approval rating, which is really amazing when you think, again, he's a Democrat in a Republican state, he's raised taxes, he hasn't been able to get the legislature to do a lot of things he'd like them to do. People like him, they're comfortable with him. I mean, I feel like some of it is still maybe the after effect of Bobby Jindal, that they kind of feel like he inherited a bad deal and he's doing the best he can. So, you know, I think the Republicans will be looking at that and saying, you know, do we really want to put a strong candidate up against him who might lose? Because that makes him even stronger, as opposed to waiting 4 years and running, you know, somebody then. And of course, the other, you know, the big thing that will happen that will kind of set the stage is this debate on the fiscal cliff, which is finally going to have to come to some sort of conclusion. When John Bell Edwards came in 2 years ago, he and the legislature, you know, were in a huge budget crisis, and they passed kind of a short-term fix, this new penny sales tax that we've all been paying, and with an expiration date, and the expiration date is this summer. And the idea was they were going to make themselves do something more comprehensive. That was supposed to happen last year. Of course, it did not happen. So at this point, the governor has given the legislature basically until January 19th, so, you know, just a couple weeks to say, you know, agree to a plan. And of course, he doesn't want to renew the sales tax. They say they don't want to. They're probably more amenable to doing that as opposed to some of the other tax ideas that are out there.
Do you think they're going to be willing to work with the governor a little bit more? Any reason to believe that, or the headwind's going to be just as strong? I
think it's just going to be, they're really far apart philosophically. They have a tendency to do things at the last minute. If they don't, they're not able to tackle the tax situation in the regular session by law, which means basically if they don't do a special session before the regular session in March, they have to come back at the end of June, and the fiscal year ends at the end of June. So it will be right up against the clock. You know, one thing that's going to be interesting is if they don't do something ahead of time, then they still, in the regular session, have to pass a budget. And the budget with no new revenue will be $1 billion shorter than it is this year.
$1 billion.
So $1 billion. And of course, most of that money has to come from higher ed and hospitals, healthcare. So, you know, it will be a budget that everybody hates. And then they'll try to clean it up at the end. That's the way they always seem to do things.
Okay, so maybe not a lot of elections, but a lot of issues coming up.
Activity, yes.
Okay, all right, thanks a lot, Stephanie. Over to Dawn and Future Watch, and we're going to talk art.
We're going to talk art. We've talked a lot on this program about all the special things that are happening around the tricentennial, and there are some specific things happening geared toward the tricentennial in the world of art. One is at NOMA, or the New Orleans Museum of Art, and it's the Orleans Collection. It's an exhibition of the selections of the city's namesake. His Philippe II, Duke of Orleans, or Duke of Orleans, from he was quite a collector of paintings in the 1700s. Over 700 paintings in his collection. For the first time ever, more than 50 of the masterpieces will be together, and they'll all be at NOMA. That's in October 26th through January 27th of next year. And it's also bringing together scholars who will be able to review these paintings, which quite an extensive collection. Also at the Ogden Museum of Art, Salazar, Portraits of Influence in Spanish New Orleans. And these tell the story of, pardon me on my butchering of names, Joseph Xavier Francisco de Salazar y Mendoza, whose career spanned the Spanish administration of New Orleans. So a look back at the history of New Orleans, both on the French side and the Spanish side, one at NOMA and one at the Ogden Museum of Art. Then if you want to go modern, we're in the middle of already P4, or Prospect 4, which is the fourth iteration of a citywide kind of modern sculpture. There are 73 different pieces, 32 of which are specific commissions to New Orleans. The theme of the whole thing is called The Lotus in Spite of the Swamp. So it's New Orleans influence, both culturally, musically, food, politically, everything. It's an international exhibition, but it's geared towards New Orleans and a South focus because of the tricentennial. And then probably the biggest news is that the Sidney and Walda Bestoff Sculpture Garden at NOMA is expanding by a full 6 acres. started just last month. It should be complete next winter to celebrate the tricentennial. It's sites for sculpture, outdoor amphitheaters, outdoor screenings, all connected by pedestrian bridges and walkways. I've got to read my notes here because they say that you will be able to see contemporary 21st century sculptures on an open lawn, under tree canopies, across open water, on cypress islands, all of that connected by walkways.
Sounds beautiful.
There are drawings on NOMA's website that really look beautiful. It almost looks like Renaissance art portraits. You're looking back at, you know, the galleries from France. It is really, really beautiful, but they'll be able to offer film screenings in the area, theater productions. It's across Roosevelt Mall, bordered by NOMA now. So it's just beautiful open area, and that all should be complete as we ring out the tricentennial.
One of the best tributes I've ever heard to that sculpture garden was when it first opened. I heard a little kid crying, and he was saying, "But Mom, I don't want to leave yet." Okay, and that's a tribute. It's a beautiful place.
It's a beautiful place, and a place to sit and do all sorts of different things, you know.
And it's great for nighttime events. They've already done some theater and screenings there, and it's just magical. It's really
And so that'll all be expanded, so it's going in like the back of the museum, down through?
Across Roosevelt Mall, it's bordered by Gulf Drive, Berkey Circle, Alvarez Drive, and Diboll Circle, so kind of catty corner sort of.
Where Christian Brothers School is, pretty much like right across from that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's really exciting, and that'll be finished, but at the beginning of
That'll
next
be
year?
finished at the end of this year. Winter
Okay.
of 2018 it will finish as we roll out this new year. And then Ogden wanted everybody to know January 15th, Martin Luther King Day, is a free admission day at the museum. You can get in and catch Solidary and Solitary before it closes on the 21st. That's a collection of the history of African-American art in our country from the 1940s until now. So there are all sorts of modern, semi-modern, and way, way back in history, all special celebrations for the tricentennial.
Exciting
in the
art
world of
projects. All right, thanks a lot, Don, for filling us in. Errol, over to you. And a place that was supposed to be an arts incubator instead has turned into a culinary school.
Yeah. I'm always amused. Every so often a new acronym bursts into the scene. I remember a few years ago, the first time I heard somebody talk about NOWFI, which was the New Orleans Wine and Food Experience. But at the time, that was an unusual term. And then people started talking about SOFAB, which is the Southern Food Museum. And now prepare yourself for 2019 for NACI, okay, which is the New Orleans Culinary and Hospitality Institute. This is a building that's been under deliberation for a long time. It was for the longest period of time an office building, the Bradford building on Howard Avenue. And it was one of the older office buildings, of which there are many in the area. Then when it fell into disuse, there was discussion about what to do with it. And a popular thing around the country has been to get an old space and to develop into like artist lofts and artist studios. So there was a big effort and a fundraising effort to develop something called Artworks, and the city's art foundation was behind it. There was some controversy. Some people in the arts community said, you know, real artists don't gather in lofts. You know, they're all out independently doing things. But you know, it was working in some cities and not in other cities. But it just never got together in New Orleans. And they had a first round of developing it, but it just never materialized. So there was another effort to make it into a culinary institute. Some of the people associated with the commander's side of the Brennans, like T. Martin and Dickie Brennan, got involved in it, and a lot of different people. A real key moment was when the state leveraged the convention center and convinced the convention center to put some money into it. Also, is that a proper use for convention center money? I guess the argument they use is that, well, this will stimulate tourism. Whatever it is, they did it. So the project is on the way. It's very ambitious. They're going to have teaching classes and, you know, for tourists who can come in, but actually also something that the state has passed a certification that people can get a degree, a post-high school degree in culinary work. There's emphasis on drinks as well as the food. And then on the 5th floor, there's going to be this, I guess, this exhibit space in one of these rooms where you can go and have parties. And so it's going to really be part of the scene, and I think stimulate life in that part of town. And so finally something seems to be happening, because it's been a long time coming there. And if you can't figure out quite where it is, if you imagine Lee Circle and then that hotel right across from it, I think it's called the Circle or La Cirque,
yeah.
Well, right across the side street from that is that building.
And so when is this going to?
They're saying 2019. They haven't given us.
2019.
But the reason we're talking about it is that they have announced the groundbreaking, and so so that's coming really soon.
Okay, that's another exciting project. All right,
Sure
Aaron,
is.
thanks a lot. Over to Stephanie, and we saw a name resurge, a former state
name?
senator who happened to be at a meeting that the mayor-elect had with some state legislators.
And caused quite a stir. In fact,
Quite a stir.
mostly because it was unexplained for a while. Derek Shepherd, who you may remember was elected, he came out of the West Bank of Jefferson Parish, was elected, was one of these guys who had a high profile instantly, very aggressive, very confident, very, wanted to climb. And he did climb pretty quickly. He went from the House to the Senate pretty quickly. He ran for Congress. If you'll remember the baggy pants bill back in the day? That was his bill. So he didn't get it passed, but he got a lot of national attention, frankly, over it, the pull up your pants bill. And so what happened is he flew a little too close to the sun, I would say. After he ran for Congress in 2006 in that race that Bill Jefferson, who was under investigation, ended up winning, he had run in the primary against him, said the congressman was unfit to serve, turned around and endorsed him. Turns out that Jefferson had sent him a legal client, Shepherd was a lawyer, that needed some money laundered. And Derek Shepherd helped her with that and ended up going to prison for that. He ended up pleading guilty, went to prison, kind of ended his career in disgrace, came back, and here he is again. And he's really just trying to get back into public life, it seems. He actually signed up to run for the legislature a couple of years ago, and there was a law in the books, a constitutional amendment that said that if you'd been convicted of a felony, you couldn't run for a state office for, I think it's 15 years. He challenged that law in court, and he won, actually. He didn't win in time to get on the ballot, but he got the law thrown out. It's over a technicality, over a wording issue. Legislators immediately came back and said, oh, that's terrible. Of course we support this. It was the will of the voters. We're going to pass it again correctly. It got through the House and it died in a Senate committee, so he can run again. And in the meantime,
any convicted felon.
Any convicted felon can run again.
We have no law about that now.
We have no law about that on the books right now. It was Karen Carter Peterson, who is a state senator now, who was actually Bill Jefferson's opponent in that congressional race, who led the committee that killed it, which was kind of interesting. Fast forward to this year, and Mayor-elect LaToya Cantrell has a meeting with current legislators, and who shows up but Derek Shepherd, and everyone's trying to figure out why. He had been at another event with her previously. He didn't really explain it. He deferred questions to Cantrell. Cantrell's office didn't really explain it. They had several days to do it. We wrote a story at The Advocate, and 24 hours later, a little more, Cantrell said, no, he will not be part of my administration. He will not be part of the transition.
So
but nobody's ever explained why he was there.
No, and then she said that he was there on his own. And then later he said, well, it was held at a church and he knew the pastor and he was helping serve food. I mean, the story has shifted a number of times.
And he now has also established a website.
Yes. And he has said, look, I would be willing to work with her. I'd be willing to work with her on issues connected to ex-offenders. He's established a website that is supposedly to kind of piggyback on this criminal justice drive that we have going on. The idea that people deserve a second chance. He's saying he deserves a second chance. Of course he does deserve a second chance. Does he deserve a second chance to be in the public trust? That's a different issue, I think. And he came to The Advocate the other day and gave an interview to my colleague Jessica Williams and said, look, if the mayor would like me to, I would be willing to say run the Sewage and Water Board, which I think is not maybe what the Sewage and Water Board needs right now.
Okay, so
but he's there, and he's it turns out your colleagues at NOLA.com reported that he had emailed a speech to LaToya Cantrell that she did not deliver. So he's he is trying to get back in the public eye, clearly.
But he is not part of Cantrell's.
He is not part of Cantrell's. The reason it blew up the way it did is that the Cantrell camp was very slow in answering. We don't really know exactly what their relationship is, and one of the reasons I think it blew up is that Cantrell has really named almost nobody to her team. So a lot of people are wondering who her people will be. So.
Okay, that leaves us with about a minute and a half now to talk about the Pelicans. That's okay. That's okay.
There's not much to talk about with the Pelicans. I mean, they're a 500 team until they prove otherwise. They've won a game on the road
Which is
recently.
a lot better, though, than previous seasons.
Yeah, I would say, but expectations
have
were
more
for them to
talent.
be much better than that. This team is 9-9 at home. They're 10-9 on the road. They've averaged 111 points a game. They give up 110 points a game. They are the definition of a 500 team.
Yeah.
And their longest winning streak of the year is 3 games. They've just been so inconsistent. They can't put it together. And when you talk to the players, they all say the right things, but nothing ever changes.
Is it coaching?
I think as Sean Payton would say, there are a lot of people have dirty hands in this. I think it's the general manager, it's the head coach, it's the 2 leaders, Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins. I mean, in the NBA, the superstars control the team, control the attitude, the atmosphere, the environment. And I think they're young guys. We forget sometimes how young Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins are. Yeah. They're early 20s. And this is their team, and they're going to have to get control of it. The good news, they get Solomon Hill back around the All-Star break. He's a guy that can help them in that department. He's a kind of a glue guy, as they say, rebound, defense. They need some of that.
Are we still seeing fan support?
Well, I think fans are sitting on their hands right now wondering and waiting to see this team take off. We don't, in New Orleans, start thinking about basketball until the Saints season's over.
Distracted by football.
Right. Now, if they take off and start winning some games and the Saints season ends, they'll get on board.
All right, guys. Looking ahead now.
This Sunday at 11 o'clock in front of St. Louis Cathedral, there's going to be a dedication of a statue of Pope John Paul II, who's been declared a saint. So they're calling him Saint Pope John Paul II. And the Archdiocese is donating so they're going to dedicate that statue. Who would have thought that this dedication to a saint would happen the same day that the other saints are playing in another temple not too far away, that same day. So.
Okay, thanks.
Saturday morning, 12th night, Mayor Landrieu throws his last king cake party, and I just have to say, I think he's really going to miss this part of the job. I think he has a lot of fun anytime there is second lining and stuff like that.
Well, he is a true New Orleans boy. Yes, indeed.
I'm just going to go out on a whim here and say that the Pelicans aren't going to get our attention for a while because the Saints are going to keep winning, and it's going to start with a beatdown of Carolina on Sunday.
I like that, Don. Well, look, I said we don't care about basketball, but I'm going to pump basketball here. Tulane University basketball. They're 11-4 right now. They only won 6 games the whole season a year ago. Mike Dunleavy, former NBA basketball coach. I wasn't sure how it's going to work out, making that transition to college. He's been doing a remarkable job. And Tulane just beat SMU the other night, who was 12-4. They've got it rolling over at Tulane.
Okay, that's great. Good news for the Green Wave. All right, guys, thanks so much for being here. Thank you all for joining us. And, of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
The firm of Bowen, McLeod & Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.